The next group of menus is called the settings menu, and there are 3 tabs here. And these are menu items that allow you to control different settings for how your camera communicates with you and gives you information. Language. Which language do you want? If you want to play a joke on your friends, just give them a language that they can't read and let them figure out how to deal with it. If you are somebody whose friend has played that trick on you, then what you do is you come to the wrench, to the first tab of the wrench, you select language, and then you just go back to whatever language you actually were using. Oh no! Aiku va! I actually don't, maybe that just means no images? I don't know. That's going to be my new expression. Aiku va. Pika zoom! Pika zoom! Anyway, so you just go to language. It will always say language in English, I believe. Let's find out. Unless language is the same word in every single language, which it doesn't. So it will always say language in English. I don't know how to pronounce that. So there you go. You can go back to whichever language you are most comfortable in. Date adjustment. You can change your format here, whether it's day, month, year, which is standard US, year, month, date, which is, I don't know who uses that. Those are, or day, month, year, which is the backwards European way of doing it. Or sorry, month, day, year is standard US. Day, month, year is US governmental and military. And then, of course, you can switch from 12 to 24-hour clock, if whichever you're more comfortable with. You can manually adjust the date. And you can manually adjust the time. And then after you've done all that, you can click Settings Complete. World Time allows you to set your home, which is my hometown. San Francisco is the closest one to me, and it doesn't give you everything to choose from, just a handful. You can also choose a destination town. Now, all those yellow dots represent towns you can pick. Vancouver, Anchorage. And as we scroll through the world, you scroll through the world using the rear command wheel here. And then you can select different towns in each time zone, in each part of the world, each continent. And so you might live in Paris, or you might live in another town in Paris, which is in the same time zone, such as another town in France, maybe not near Paris, like Nice. You might live in Nice, but there's no town, there's no Nice option. So Paris would be the closest one you can pick. So you can then just pick which one it is. Now, your destination town, so if you're going to travel on vacation, let's say, and I'm going to go to, let's pretend I'm going to go to Athens. Now it will automatically tell me what time it is in Athens, and I can change my time setting from home to Athens when I'm on the plane, so that when I land in Athens, all of my image EXIF data has the correct date and time on it. So you can switch between home and when you fly back from Athens, then you can switch back to home. And there's some pretty good options, a lot of really common places to visit. Honolulu, great town. Switch back to San Francisco just because. Text size being standard or large, and you can see the difference there. If you're in large, it will enlarge mostly the text size that you're looking at right there, and you can see how it's, as I scroll through, it makes the text that I'm looking at even larger than the text around it. So if you have trouble reading text on screen, or your eyes are not perhaps as young as they once were, then large is a good option to help you read the text on your menu systems and other screens. It doesn't just affect text on menu systems. Sound effects, this is your beep when you autofocus or things like that. You can select what you want to have it beep for. In focus, oh, something's in focus, it'll beep. I have auto exposure lock on, it'll beep. My self timer's going, counting down, it'll beep. My remote control is being activated and it takes a picture when it's remote controlling, it'll beep. Oh, it's selected an autofocus point, it'll beep. One push file format, so I've changed what file format I want it to be in by pushing the raw FX button, it'll beep. Oh, the shake reduction's active, it'll beep. The Wi-Fi's turning on or off, it'll beep. And then of course the volume. So these are a really good way to scare off animals that you want to take a picture of or irritate other parents in the grandstands of your kid's soccer game. So if you're going to use sounds, I really recommend not using them for everything, but it does kind of make sense to have them for the self-timer. And also, for instance, the Wi-Fi. Those are the two things that really make a lot of sense to have a beep for, because it gives you some audio feedback to important functions. But if you have a beep for everything, your camera's constantly going to be making noise, and to the point that it will be distracting to other people and to your own photographic concentration. LCD display, this is where you can change some information. Guide display. So guide display, what this does is you can see how I've got the little help information here. That help bar that we just saw will always appear whenever you have the lens collapsed, the kit lens collapsed. But as we saw earlier, in the videos, it would tell you what different functions did. That's guide display. So if you turn guide display off, it will not display the function information at the bottom of the menu screens. Display color allows you to change the color scheme of your camera's interface through 12 different options. Just whatever pleases you the most. There wasn't a brown option, and that's disappointing. But at any rate, they're all fairly pleasing color selections. I just happen to like the orange and black. LCD display settings. This is where you can tweak how your LCD displays. At night, I turn the LCD display all the way down because I don't want to have a super bright LCD display at night blinding me when my eyes are adjusted to the darkness. But during the day, especially if you're at a sporting event or something, you might want to turn it all the way up so that you can see the screen in the light. You can also determine how much color saturation you want. You can see how the contrast bars are changing. If you have your K-S2, you might not be able to see it in the video so well, but your saturation changes how intense your screen displays the colors. Now, these settings do not change your image settings at all. They don't change how the camera records an image, they just change how the camera displays information, images, video, and live view on the screen. Display color, adjust blue and amber. This allows you to change your balance between blue and amber on the screen. Same thing with changing your balance between green and magenta. How much green there is versus how much magenta there is in the tones. And if you get a bunch of settings changed, let's say you want to go back quickly to zero balance on any one of them, you can just hit the green button. The second settings menu has a few options about how you're going to interface with camera data. You can change your USB connection between peer-to-peer and MSC. I forget what MSC stands for. I just use peer-to-peer because it works, it interfaces easily with computers. I actually don't use the USB connection that often. I haven't even used it on the K-S2 at all. I just like to take the SD card out and pop it in the computer. I find that to be a little bit faster, although the K-S2 does not have a USB 3 port like the K3 and the K3 II do. So it's not going to be quite as fast with a USB port, especially if you're using like a 95 megabyte SD card in your camera, like this one is. Then your data transfer from SD card to computer through your computer's SD port is going to be so much faster than your USB that there's just no reason to even use USB on this camera. Your HDMI out allows you to change how your HDMI connection, if you use the HDMI connection to connect this to a video screen, will display. Folder name, you can change. You can have it just be your date, or you can have it be Pentax something. I've been using the date on this, and it really has been very helpful for organizing photos. So I've kind of become a huge fan of it. But with Pentax, if you change it to that, you can change the folder name. So if your name is, let's say, David, now all of your folders will be David 100, 101, 102. Every time you fill up a folder or do a new function that creates a new folder, like some of the drive modes create a different folder for each image capture. It will have it be a folder named David something. Or if you have a client name, let's say, and I hit cancel that time, but let's say you had a client and you have a system where you give the clients numbers. You could assign a 5-digit number to that folder, or up to a 5-digit number. So if you're using if you're doing a work for client number 186, you could call it 00186, and then you know every folder that you did for this shoot was for client number 186. And so this just gives you some ability to change how your camera records your folders, your images, what folder names it uses, so you can organize some of your images very easily with folders of a certain name. You can only change the folder name if you select this option. The date option will always, you cannot adjust that. Creating a new folder, you can automatically create a new folder if you want to. So let's say you're going to go out and do 2 jobs for 2 different clients on the same day, clients 186 and client 352. You can finish your shoot for client 352, go back, change your folder name to 186, create a new folder, and now you're going to start shooting all of your photos in folder 186 and then beyond. So you know exactly where your photos for clients 352 and 186 end and then start. File name, you can change your file name too. I happen to like naming them something. I name them K-S2, K3, whatever camera I'm using, because of my own organizational system. But if you wanted to use different file names, let's say that today you're going to use the K-S2, so you could use your initials, let's say. And then tomorrow your sister or wife is going to use the K-S2. You could change the file name to their initials. That way, you would be able to keep track of who took what photo. Or if you just wanted it to have a different prefix, you could use your name, something like that, all the time. You can also change video names, but this allows you to change your file name so you can have it say whatever you want. File number, sequential numbering means that basically every time you create a new folder, the new folder is based on the last number. The new images are based on the last number. So if you're on image 2004, your next image is going to be 2005. When you go into a new folder, it'll be 2006 instead of going back to 1. This is a really good option. I recommend leaving it like this, because if you're constantly resetting file numbers, there's a better chance of accidentally overwriting a file. File numbering resets at 10,000 if you use sequential, and quite frankly, if you're filling up 10,000 photos and putting them all in the same file folder on your computer at once, you have a different problem. But if you're shooting 5 photos and then 10 and then 12 and then 6 photos, and you dump all of those into one file, you're going to have a lot of overwrite and you're going to risk losing images. So sequential numbering is a good option to keep checked. Resetting file numbering will go back to 1 from whatever you're at. So you can, if you're out doing shoots for multiple clients, after the shoot in the morning, then you can go reset your file numbering to 1 for the afternoon shoot, change your file naming convention to your new client's number or something like that, or your folder name to a new client number. And then you can know, if you're charging by the photo, you'll know how many photos you've taken very easily for each client just by looking at the last one in the sequence. Copyright information. You can embed copyright information, your name, and it gives you a lot of room in here to record information. You could record your name, as well as even your phone number, I believe, if you really wanted to, and who actually holds the copyright. So if you're doing work for a client who has insisted in their contract that they retain image rights, you can list the client's name, ABC Construction Corp or something like that, as the copyright holder. This image is embedded in your images, or this information rather, is embedded in your image's EXIF data. So anytime you take a picture, the photographer and the copyright holder will be in that EXIF data, so you don't even have to worry about inserting it manually. If you turn over all of your files to a client, they will always have the photographer's name in the EXIF data. If someone steals your image and puts it up on their website, your name will always be in the EXIF data, even if that image is on their website, unless they use an EXIF stripper. And I don't even know for sure that an EXIF stripper can remove this information. So this is a pretty useful feature in the KS2. The third of 4 settings menus has flicker reduction. This is 60 or 50 hertz. This has to do with the flickering, I believe, on the LCD only. And if you're in a setting like, let's say you're surrounded by fluorescent lights, your screen might appear to flicker. Let's see what happens if I change the flicker setting here. All right, nothing happens on the K3's record screen. Oops. At any rate, the flicker reduction should have an effect for when you're in a setting like fluorescent lit area where fluorescent lights flicker themselves to help prevent the screen from flickering. Auto power off is how long your camera will stay on without any buttons being pushed before it automatically turns off. I think the default is 1 minute. I'm a fan of keeping it at 5 because that gives me some time to think about another shot without having to turn the camera back on again. Indicator lamps. These are lights like this blue ring around the OK and the ring around the shutter button here. And you can turn them to be bright like that, dim, or off entirely. I like to have them on dim because they don't use a lot of battery power, but the indicator lamps let you know if pushing a button will have an effect. For instance, the indicator lamp around the OK lights up when you're manually setting your autofocus point, and that's a reminder that that's the button you have to push to be able to get to the autofocus point selection function. This will have them light up or not light up when your self-timer is going. This will have them light up or not light up when you are using a remote control. Here's your Wi-Fi screen. This is pretty useful. We'll see a little bit more about this in video 5 and how to interface with it, but we're going to go through it right now as well. Your Wi-Fi action mode is on or off, so you can manually turn on your Wi-Fi mode here or by holding down the Wi-Fi button on top of the camera. Holding this down when it's on, the button on top turns it off. There we go. Wi-Fi disabled, Wi-Fi enabled just by holding down the Wi-Fi button on top of the camera. So I'm going to turn that off. Communication info. This gives you your communication info for your camera. This will tell you the camera's network name. So when you use your phone, and we'll see this in video 5, I know that because I already recorded it, when you turn the Wi-Fi on your Android smartphone, this network will show up on your phone, and you connect to it through the Image Sync app. And here's the password, and the password is case sensitive, that you would enter in the Image Sync app to connect to the camera and gain control. And if you need to know it, here's your camera's MAC address. You can also reset the transfer settings to the default values. And nothing had changed anyway. Doesn't matter. So clearly there's a way to change transfer settings, such as your password or network connection. I have not figured out how to do that, or if that's maybe a feature which is coming out in a later version of the firmware, but it's not currently available. I don't know. Because believe me, I would like to change some of this. That password's impossible to remember. You could also reset all of your custom functions, returning every setting in your camera to its default setting. Don't recommend that unless you really need to, because resetting all of the functions can be a pain. These last settings menu options have some different functions that are useful for keeping your camera maintained. Pixel mapping checks your image sensor for dead pixels or hot pixels, pixels that have failed and no longer record information accurately. So if you're seeing images that have a lot of red and green and blue dots on them, that means you have what are called hot pixels or dead pixels, and they're not recording image data properly. So what you do is you go into pixel mapping and you map the pixel if you have a battery that's fully charged, and then the camera will look at the sensor, run some data through it, figure out which pixels aren't working, and then it will remove those pixels from the image, and whatever pixel data needs to be there, it will average the pixels around it to figure out what data should be there. Dust removal. Dust removal is you hit OK to shake the sensor to remove dust. You can also make it a startup and shut down action. So every time you turn on or turn off the computer, or the camera rather, the image sensor will shake to remove dust. I think it's a good idea to have it be both a startup and shut down option. Sensor cleaning, I don't have enough power to do it. If I can't pixel map, I guarantee the camera will not let me clean the sensor. But what this does is this opens up the mirror and opens the shutter so that you can see the sensor and then touch it with a very gentle brush to get any tricky dirt off of it. But there's not enough power. So I have a video that shows how to clean a digital camera sensor. So if you need to know how to do that, check out that video. I will put it in the link, a link to it in the description to this video. You can format all of the data on your card and camera. Don't really want to do that. Firmware info. This is the firmware that you are currently running. Right now, as of this video's recording, the only firmware option is version 1.0. There's no updates to it. So, but if you buy this, let's say you're 2 years in the future. Hello, future people. And you've just bought this and you're running firmware 1.0. At that point, there will almost certainly have been updates to the firmware. So this will tell you what version of firmware you're running and whether or not you need to update it to get the latest and greatest version, the most stable version with the most features. Or whether or not perhaps in the future you've bought one used and it has the most upgraded version and you don't need to do anything. Certification marks. And these are certification data which relate to, I believe, the Wi-Fi, because it's got some of this similar information underneath the screen. But the certification basically just says this camera meets some standards of some kind. The next set of menus is the control menu setting group, and there are 5 of these. These menu items allow you to manually control the way in which your camera functions and how different options within it function. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I'll tell you what they all do and how they benefit your photography. Exposure value steps, that's what EV stands for, has to do with how closely the camera can record light. So 1/3 or 1/2 exposure value. Now, you've seen sensitivity, let's say, your image sensitivity of 100, 200, 400. 100 to 200 is a full stop. Third stop would be 125 and 160, and a half stop would be 150. So I like to keep it at 1/3 stops because that gives me more control over how accurately I want to have the camera meter and record scenes. It also happens like with shutter speeds. A 60th to a 30th is a full stop. A 45th is a half stop. A 50th and a 40th are third stops. So setting it at a third stop just gives you a little bit more flexibility in image capture accuracy. Sensitivity, so exposure value steps are done in thirds. Sensitivity steps match exposure value step, or you can set it to your ISO being 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600. I like to have more ISO options. I shoot at 250 quite frequently at night because it's a little bit pushing, and it gives you really nice colors at night. Your meter operating time is a choice of 10, 3, or 30 seconds, and what that means is when you push the shutter button down halfway to get a meter reading, your meter will stay on for either 10, 3, or 30 seconds. I happen to like 10 seconds. 30 is overkill. There's no reason to leave it on for 30 seconds, but 3 is a little bit short because it's kind of hard to figure out if what you're looking at is really if the settings that the camera is telling you is really what you want to use. In manual mode especially, 3 seconds is a very quick turn off, and you might not even be able to get all the information you need with 3 seconds. So 10 is a good number for that. AEL with AF locked, off or on. Basically what this means is that if you lock your AF, your autofocus, with this button right here, it also locks your auto exposure. It locks your shutter speed and aperture as well. I like to have it on because when I have my autofocus locked, either by half depressing the shutter speed or by using this button, I want to know that my exposure is not going to change as well. And that's just a personal preference. If you're in a setting where lighting changes rapidly, then turning that to off might be a better option for you. Link the exposure and focus points, on or off. When this is on, whatever is in focus, like let's say this bit right here, that's what the exposure is going to be predominantly based on. So if you have an automatic exposure setting, such as program, let's say, or auto mode, or even aperture priority, whatever the exposure is based on what is in focus, or whatever is in focus will give the camera more information about the exposure. That way, if you're taking a picture of a person's face as they're, say, running across the line at a track and field event, that person, when their face is in focus, that will also be what's exposed properly, so you don't have to worry about their face being either super blown out or super dark when you only have one shot to get that photo. So I like to leave that on because it allows the autofocus to work with the meter in a way that's really helpful for your photography. Auto exposure value compensation, off or on. What this means is that if you turn it to on, if the camera says, hey dummy, your exposure isn't correct, I'm going to do it correctly for you. If it's off, the camera says, well, I don't think you're right, but there's nothing I'm going to do, so have fun with that underexposed image. I like to have creative control over my images, and I like to have creative control over their exposure. So I leave this to off because I don't want the camera to override my exposure settings. I tend to take pictures where I have a specific idea in mind about what I want them to look like, and I don't want the camera, which has a different idea than I do, to enforce its will on me. Bulb mode options, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is the way bulb mode typically works, where as long as you hold down the shutter button, the shutter will be open. It's kind of a pain because if you want to take a 3-hour exposure or even a 15-minute exposure, you've got to stand there with your finger on the bulb button the whole time. Type 2 is the one I prefer. If you push the shutter button, it opens the shutter. You push the shutter button, it closes the shutter. This is really good if you're going to do things like astrophotography or long exposure photography, or if you're going to do darkroom flash photography where you have a black room, all the lights out, you open up the shutter, you sit down in front of the camera, you trigger a flash to take your picture, and then you come over and close the shutter, and now you've got your image. You can also do light painting with this more easily and things like that. This is in classic camera terminology. Type 2 is called time mode, and sometimes you would see it marked as a T on the shutter speed settings. T is a better option most, if not all of the time, for bulb mode than B is. So I like to leave it in type 2. Control menu 2, bracketing order. So there are 4 options for bracketing order. Now bracketing is where, as you saw in the drive mode section of video 2, I believe it was, we talked about how bracketing works. Takes an underexposed image, a properly exposed image, and then an overexposed image so that you can compensate for errors in metering that come from wide-angle lenses, for instance, or if you want to take multiple images just to make sure you get the proper image when you're not entirely certain how accurate the exposure meter is going to be, or for many other reasons. Bracketing is something that's very useful. This allows you to choose what order the bracketing is done in: properly exposed, underexposed, over proper, over proper, under, proper over under. I like this because as I'm looking at all the photos in their folder on my computer, I can see dark normal light, dark normal light, dark normal light. And I know where it starts because underexposed, proper, overexposed is a good order just logically to use for tracking exposures when you're looking at them on a screen. One push bracketing, on or off. What this does is that when this is on and you have bracketing selected, you push the button and the shutter button, and it goes boom, boom, boom. Well, you don't want your camera going boom, that's bad. It goes click, 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 and it takes 3 exposures with 1 shutter release to bracket. With the off, you have to push the shutter button each time to take each of the 3 bracketed exposures. I happen to like on because typically when you're bracketing exposures, you're not waiting for a long time between them. So if you have to push the button 3 times, that's an opportunity for you to have camera shake or slightly change the angle of the image or the alignment or something. So if you're taking bracketed images for an HDR, having it set to on gives you a better chance of image alignment success. And just, it's always simpler to have to hit the button 1 time than 3. Interval shooting options. So we saw in the second video interval shooting. So here are 2 options for using interval shooting. Exposure begins at set intervals. So let's say you set your interval to 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, this is faster than 30 seconds, but you get the idea. Every 30 seconds, that camera's going to take an image, regardless of how long the image is set for. So if you have a 25-second image, it's going to take a 25-second image, wait 5 seconds, take the next one. At standby interval, exposure begins after the standby interval passes after the completion of the previous exposure. So with this mode, what that should do is if you set your interval at 3 seconds, it will take an image, no matter how long that exposure is, wait for 3 seconds, and then take the next one. And this is something that they didn't have on the K3. It caused me a whole lot of consternation when I learned how to use interval shooting, because I thought that interval should work like this, but it was working this way. So whichever you're more comfortable with, whether it's that you want to set the interval time. And so the functional difference in this is this says, I'm going to set the interval time and not worry about the shutter speed. As long as the shutter speed is not longer than your interval, you're fine. So let's say you have a time lapse you want to make of tomato seeds sprouting. So you want to take a picture every 5 minutes. So you set your interval to 5 minutes, and then all day you have it set in aperture priority mode, and it just takes a picture every 5 minutes. Some of those shots will be 1/250th of a second, others will be 3 seconds as you get towards dusk. But every 5 minutes there will be one, and it gives you a good, even depiction of how that sprout is growing throughout the course of a day. So with standby interval, let's say you're taking images that will range from 1 second to 10 seconds, and you set your interval at 3 seconds, well, sometimes the 1 second image, then the next one will be 4 seconds later. If you have a 10-second image, then the actual time between images will still be 3 seconds, but it will be 13 seconds from the start of one image to the start of the next. So that's functionally how they are different. Autofocus operation in interval shooting. Lock focus at first exposure, or adjust focus for each shot. So let's say you're doing an interval of star trails. This means that between each shot your camera will not select a different focus point. But if you have it set to this one and somebody walks into the foreground, your camera might refocus on them, and then you'll have one or multiple shots where the stars are out of focus. You'll suddenly have these nice clean star trails turn into blurry soft star trails for a few shots, and then go back to being nice clean star trails. I'm sure that there is a creative use for this. I don't know what it is. There are just situations that I've never come across, but there's probably a time that would be good. But in general, locking your focus at the first exposure is the best option to have consistently in focus shots that contribute to your interval. White balance adjustment range. So what this allows you to do is manually set your white balance, and then the camera will adhere to that regardless of what it thinks is correct. Auto adjustment allows the camera to automatically change the white balance setting if it thinks you're wrong. It can say, hey dummy, I know that we're inside a corporate office and you said fluorescent, but there's a window over there, and so I kind of think it's daylight, so I'm going to do that. Auto adjustment can be problematic because you can use white balance as a creative tool to adjust image color. And also, if you're in fluorescent lighting, because they flicker, even though we can't, as people can't really perceive them, the flickering with our eyes, because they flicker, cameras can see that. And if they flicker in such a way that the camera misjudges the white balance in the room, it can throw off a portrait. And if that's your best portrait, other than the white balance, then you might have lost a really good shot. I like to use fixed also because I like to tell the camera what I want it to do and not trust it to second guess me. White balance when using flash. So you have 4 options here when you're using the flash. This automatically switches the white balance setting to auto when the flash is activated, regardless of what you set it to. This automatically switches the white balance to multi-auto white balance when the flash is activated, regardless of what you set it to. This automatically sets the white balance to flash when the flash is activated, regardless of what you set it to. And this allows you to set the white balance to whatever you want it to be and leave it there, and the camera will automatically have the proper white balance, or the white balance that you have chosen, regardless of what it actually should be. Multi-auto white balance for this is actually, I think, the best option because flashes have a different color than fluorescent light, than daylight, and incandescence. And so if you have it set to multi-auto, then the scene, which could have multiple different light sources, including the flash, or if your flashes have different colors to the bulbs, allows the camera to still figure out what should be white, regardless of the different colors of light, and correct that for you. You could also leave it to unchanged if you want to manually set it, but that runs the risk of everything looking very blue. Auto white balance under tungsten light. Strong or subtle correction. Tungsten light, like incandescent bulbs, will create an orange color if the white balance is set to daylight, let's say. So the strong and subtle correction change how much of that orange color is removed in the white balance correction. I happen to like a subtle correction because incandescent light can give people a warm look to them when you take a picture of someone under an incandescent light source. This third menu has some additional functions. Color temperature steps, Kelvin or Mirad. And this is two different scales for measuring color temperature. I'm familiar with Kelvin, so that's what I leave it set at, but if you're familiar with Mirad, this is how you change it to that. Superimposing the AF area on or off, that is in the viewfinder. It will put a little red square on the part of the image that's in focus. And so all you're doing with this is turning it on or off. And this also works, this works just to tell you what is going to be in focus when you take the image. I think it's a good idea, and I think it's very helpful because it allows you to quickly judge through the viewfinder what you're taking a picture of. Autofocus, AFS, autofocus servo or single setting. Focus priority or release priority. What is more important to you as a photographer, having something in focus or having the picture be taken? This is where you make that decision. First frame action in autofocus continuous or AFC. Release priority, auto, or focus priority. It's whether you want to take the picture quickly, whether you want to have it be in focus properly before it's taken, or whether you want to let the camera decide for you. Action in autofocus AFC continuous shooting. So this is when you have your drive mode as one of your hold down the shutter button and takes boom, click, 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 picture after picture after picture. Focus priority, auto priority, or frames per second priority, meaning that you're either going to maintain, so under focus priority, if your subject's moving toward you very quickly, let's say, your camera in AFC mode is going to maintain focus on your subject. And if you're in your 5.5 frame per second burst mode, it might go down to 1 or 1.5 or 2 frames per second just to maintain that autofocus in focus priority, in your focus priority setting. In auto, the camera determines what to do for you. In FPS priority, that means that no matter whether or not your subject's in focus, you're going to shoot at the proper frame per second speed that you've selected. I prefer to have fewer images but have them be in focus, so I tend to leave it on focus priority. Hold autofocus status. And what this does is this allows you to select between off, low, medium, and high how much priority you want the camera to give to maintaining your subject in focus. And that actually should be high for me. I don't know how that got to off. But the level is basically, if I have a person who's running bases at a softball game, I want that person to stay in focus. So this will make sure that the autofocus keeps that subject in focus as they move and places a high priority on that functionality. Autofocus with remote control, on or off. When I use a remote control, I want the autofocus to work. I find that to be really useful for things like video where I'm in front of the camera, or portraits. For instance, this week we did a photo shoot at work and I was taking pictures of everybody. I set the camera up on a tripod and I didn't touch it all day except to turn it on or off between appointments, and just use a remote control to autofocus on the person's face in live view using the face detection setting. And the portraits all came out really, really well. Well, they all came out in focus. It didn't all come out well. But at any rate, autofocus with a remote control is a good option because it allows you to autofocus from away from the camera. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to autofocus with the remote. The fourth of the control menus starts with release while charging. This is your flash, is what it's talking about. And basically, your flash takes a second to charge up because it's got a little capacitor in it that has to obtain enough power to trigger the flash. Off means that you can, if you have the flash popped up, you cannot take a picture until that flash is ready to go if the flash is needed. On means you can take a picture without the flash being ready to go. The flash just simply won't trigger and you'll get a dark image. I happen to prefer to leave it on because I don't want to have to wait for the flash to charge up to take a picture if there's a good shot there. And even if it's underexposed, there's a good amount in RAW of underexposure recovery that can be performed. Color space are sRGB and Adobe RGB. That's just the way that the camera records color data. You'll want to leave that in sRGB unless you work for Adobe, I guess. I don't even know any software programs that do well reading Adobe RGB. Maybe Photoshop, I don't know. Save rotation info, on or off. That will save in the image's EXIF whether it was taken with portrait orientation or landscape orientation. And that allows programs like Photoshop to open up the image in its proper orientation so that you don't have to rotate images when you open them up to do editing. Save menu location, reset, or save. And what that means is that if you have it to save menu location, whenever you exit out of the menu, it will go back to that same tab. And these are all the tabs we're looking at in this video. So this will return you to the same tab that you were just at. This takes you to the first tab of the first menu item. I happen to like this because the first tab of the first menu item has the majority of the functions you're going to be using on a day-to-day basis. So since it's the one you'll use most often, it's easy just to hit menu and go back to that whenever you need to. Catch in focus is whether or not the camera will automatically fire as a subject enters the focus zone. So it would be on or off. And this is really good if you're at a car race and you've got a Formula One car coming around a corner here, and your focus zone is right here. So the Formula One car comes around, it's out of focus, out of focus, out of focus, in focus, camera triggers, and now you've got a really great picture of your Formula One car right when it is entering the focus zone. That's not a mode that I use very often, so I tend to leave it to off. AF fine adjustment. Off, apply all, or apply one. So AF fine adjustment adjusts how your lenses autofocus. With off, your lenses all focus according to factory default tolerances built into the camera's programming. And for Pentax lenses and other lenses, that really works fine. I've never found a need to adjust the AF fine adjustment on any lens. I know people who have, but for me it's never been an issue. Apply all applies the same automatic focus fine-tune adjustment to all lenses. So if you set your AF fine-tune adjustment, it applies that setting to every autofocus lens you have. This allows you to apply autofocus fine-tune adjustments to individual lenses. And here you can change your settings. And so then anytime you have a different lens mounted, you would come in here and if you need to fine-tune the autofocus, you can do it that way. But I've never had a lens where I need to adjust the autofocus fine-tune setting. So at any rate, if you run into that, that's how you do it. Using the aperture ring, disable or enable. Older Pentax lenses have an aperture ring on them, which looks like this ring on this Sigma lens right here. You can see how it has the aperture settings. And with enable, it allows you to use the aperture ring to manually set the aperture or to have it in A mode. With disable, you have to have it in A mode. And the advantage to having it be enabled is that if you're using a classic or vintage camera lens that does not have an A mode on it, then you won't be able to use that lens's aperture or different aperture settings on it without enabling it. So this basically is saying, I want to use old lenses and I'm going to do it that way, or I want to use new lenses and override the automatic aperture setting. So leaving it for enabled is a good idea because a lot of the old Pentax lenses are exceedingly good, very sharp, nice color and contrast transmission, and very inexpensive. And then the last menu here is Reset Custom Functions, and this allows you to reset all of the functions that we've just gone through on these 4 previous menus setting. I'm going to hit Cancel. I'm going to get out of that because I don't want to have to reset all of those functions again. And that is it. That is the entire menu system on the Pentax K-S2 and what everything does. Whew, wow. These are always the longest videos to do, and my jaw is so tired. And I'll bet if you go back to the first section of the video that we just recorded, I don't have this raspy cheese grater went over my vocal cords sound to my voice because I have just been talking literally for like the last hour and a half. If you have any questions, please, or if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Thumbs up. There we go. Up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and I'm producing content which is good for you. If you have questions, please ask those below. I'm pretty good about answering them fairly quickly. If you have suggestions or thoughts or ideas for this and other videos, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to make those if I have the technical know-how and equipment. And one last thing. Oh, if you'd like to subscribe, you can do that by clicking the subscribe button, and then you'll find out when I have more camera and photography related videos. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching and take great photos.